Hey guys, you're going to love this episode. I'm going to continue to talk about Corona a little bit. There is some conspiracy quote unquote theories. There are theories emerging that this is a different situation than we know, than we understand. Is this a bioweapon? Is this a cover for mass camps and construction of detention facilities? We're going to see. And also, the second part of the show, I talk a lot about how the Chinese censorship model, how some of it works, how we need to be careful about that in the United States, and some repercussions about unfettered immigration into the United States. So thank you for listening. Oh, you can follow me on my website, tstutch.com. You can email me, tayradio1@gmail.com, Twitter, tstutch1, and like and subscribe on YouTube, Taylor Space Stutch. Thank you. All right, let's talk some more about Corona, my Corona, and then, we'll see how this continues on. So, of course, everybody knows about this Corona outbreak. I'm currently in Taipei, and I have been just kind of not going out into the public spaces, haven't gone to the gym in a couple days, which I'm not a fan of. But as I've previously talked about, as a follower, or not a follower, but as a studier, or I don't know, a student of Taleb and Taleb's philosophy, I find it best to be paranoid in these kind of situations than to be cavalier about them, just because we don't know what it is. People might say, well, dude, people die of the flu every year. And my response to that is, yes, that's true. However, unless there is a special flu outbreak, which is killing like above normal numbers, then generally speaking, the flus tend to target people with weaker immune systems, older people, people that are vulnerable. And then on top of that, the other thing about the regular flu, which can become deadly when it turns into pneumonia, but the other thing about that is that you generally aren't worried about a mass panic at a hospital where you won't be able to get care. That's also one of the situations here, is that yes, this could just be nothing. However, in the current environment it is, you wouldn't want to get sick in this. You wouldn't want to get pneumonia now anyway, because if there is a panic or there is an outbreak of this particular type of pneumonia and people start rushing to the hospital, you don't want to be caught in a situation where you have pneumonia, but there are, the hospital is over capacity by 50, 60%, and you can't get in to see a doctor. That's actually one of the things that's going on in China right now, is like, I tend to agree with many people that it's very possible that this is really not as bad as it seems, but the panic that has been induced is making the situation worse because too many people are going to the hospital to get tested. And because of that, they're exposing themselves to whatever virus is out there. We also don't know, like I've said before at the beginning when this started, we also don't know the people who were dying. We don't know what their situation was beforehand. We don't know how many of them were already probably going to die, right, because of an illness that they already had. So what I want to talk about right now is some conspiracy theory. And maybe it's not conspiracy theory, but there's a couple things. So obviously, one of the first big things that people are talking about is a bioweapon that was accidentally released, or just people being careless in Wuhan that work at a virology facility. So yes, there appears to be a large facility or a very high-level facility that works on viruses and studies viruses over in Wuhan, where the outbreak occurred. So it's very possible that this is where, that this had something to do with it, what's going on. So a lot of people might be like, well, how does that happen? There's people that are like, well, they wouldn't just drop the bioweapon. And it's like, no, you got to realize people make mistakes. One thing about, and this is one reason why I'm such an advocate of Taleb's ideas about resilience and robustness and anti-fragility over things like efficiency, because we make mistakes, we fuck up. So the systems that we make, if they become too efficient and too fragile, then somebody makes one mistake and then you have a breakdown of the system. So it's extremely possible that somebody, was working on something and made a mistake, maybe got themselves infected, didn't realize it, walked out of the lab, and boom, now we've got a situation on our hands. So that's possible. And some people say it could be deliberate. I'm not sure that's the case, because I don't think the Chinese government would want to be dealing with this. I really don't think the Chinese government would want to deal with this situation at the moment. Now, there's another theory that there's a guy on Twitter, Adam Scrabble, smart dude, got some really valuable insights on things like sales and also just general geopolitical information. The guy seems to have a very good understanding of many things around the world. That being said, he's a person. He's subject to human error. He's subject to biases and perception, and also maybe trusting sources that he shouldn't trust. Who knows? But he falls into the camp of, he thinks that this is a cover operation for the Chinese Communist Party to build concentration camps. And so he thinks that what was going on is that there were, protests are going on within China. I've said this before. A lot of people don't realize that during the Tiananmen Square massacre, this is people, I've talked to people that were in China or knew people that were in China at the time, and they said during Tiananmen Square that there were actual protests around the country, that the world only ever hears about the protests at Tiananmen Square, but there were actually protests around the country at the time. And I have heard from some people that at the time I believe were pretty credible that China deals with civil unrest on kind of like a regular basis. Right? It's like in the United States. It's quite normal in the United States to have protests, to have people kind of gather, maybe go on strike, do something like that. And I've heard that in China, they also deal with the same thing. But because the Communist Party needs to maintain control and they need to maintain the facade of control, that they oftentimes put down these strikes, they put down these protests, they put down any kind of civil disobedience, and you're not going to hear about it. And that's totally understandable. So for people that don't understand, the Chinese government, people might go, oh, well, you could do it on social media. Well, one, look at how social media is censored currently. This is the big fear that that conservatives have at the moment in the United States, is social media censorship. And it's a well-founded fear, because what we see in China is an effective social media censorship operation. They have it so effective that people do not talk about sensitive topics on social media. And when they do, they are aware of the risk they are taking. We don't want to be like that in the United States. We really don't. And I know that the left wing, this is why people need to leave the country in the U.S. People need to go and travel to various parts of the world. They need to see how different parts of the world live and operate and come back and say, okay, this is why I love the freedom that we have. Right? This is why I need to advocate for freedom, rule of law, because otherwise we end up going down a rabbit hole of authoritarian censorship. Now, back to the China thing. So China regularly puts down protests. From what I've heard, I haven't seen protests, but I've heard from people in China. I've also heard from people, there were people that I ran across in China that had parents that grew up there that said that, stuff happens here, but basically the government puts it down and nobody hears about it. They don't hear about it because the government's censorship of social media is very strong. So they have an online police force that actively monitors the internet. But what they most likely do is use algorithms to flag potentially dangerous content. And once they flag the content, then they go ahead and start listening in. Actually, somebody that I met, I know somebody that has lived there that was telling me that what happens is that when you're talking to somebody, they basically have like a point system. If you're on a social media app, what they do is, and I'm not going to name the social media app, but there is some very prominent social media apps that everyone uses. When some keywords are picked up, what happens is they start to dock you points. And after a certain number of points of keywords that they notice, then they start to dedicate a person to your feed. So at first what they do is they'll be like, oh, he said this sensitive word. He said that sensitive word. He said this sensitive phrase. Then after enough of those, then they start actively monitoring you individually. This is the system that they use. And then after that, I mean, it's game over, right? Because then they're going to, all of your searches, everything you said is probably going to be dug up. They're probably going to look at everything that you do and see like what the fuck you're up to. And so that is the situation over there. Now, this guy Adam Scrabble, thinks that what they're doing is they're building concentration camps, and they're building basically, camps to contain political dissidents. And if it's not political dissidents, it could be religious minorities like Muslims. I'm going to pause here and run some sponsorships. So I don't know what I think about the conspiracy theory, or it's not, I say conspiracy theory, but let's just say it's a hypothesis, or it's a thesis that the current situation in China, people are not actually dying so much from the coronavirus any more than like regular illness over there. But what's happening is the government is using the coronavirus to cloak a mass clampdown on disobedience within the country and build potential camps for people in the future. Now, some critiques of that I would have, I'm not saying that that's wrong. I hate to hear that because I'm leaving the country, I'm leaving Taiwan tomorrow because I don't want to be caught in a lockdown situation here. I also don't want to be caught in a situation where the virus spreads out of control here. And, like I said, this is unfamiliar territory for me. If I had a long-term stay already locked in and I had, enough water and food to last me for a couple months, I would probably not leave. Because I'd say, look, I'm in as good a situation as I can be in. However, I don't have that here. And I would like my Chinese to be a little bit better before I get caught up in an epidemic. Now, back in the States, my family and I do have backup food and water supplies. So if something happens in the States, I have relatives that live out in the country. I could go out into the country. We have backup food, backup water, which everyone should have. So you want to have backup supplies for every kind of scenario. Some people think that I'm paranoid. Or people like to make fun of people that prepare. They call them preppers. I wouldn't prepare to the point where it's detrimental to my life. So, for example, I'm not going to dedicate all my savings in my life to like building an underground bunker and things like that. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to have like stocks of food and water and things like that in your home for any kind of emergency. It could be like something like this, like a potential pandemic. It could be just power outage for a long enough period of time. It could be disruption of the food supply for various reasons. So there's a lot of reasons why everyone should be prepared and be more robust in our current society. But like I said, I wouldn't dedicate my life to it like some people do. But anyway, this guy thinks that they are just making cover for concentration camps. And I don't know about that because my critique of that is that, and I know I've said that earlier, but one of my big critiques of that is how much potential damage this situation is doing to the country. So maybe I'll tell you what I see. For one, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm reading online that there are, that people in China are upset with the government's response to this thing. That the medical system there is not very good, and the hospitals are overcrowded. They can't take care of all the patients. Some people are dying and laying on the in the aisles of the hospital. Now, like I said, that might not be because of this particular virus. It could just be because, someone has the regular flu and died. But regardless, to me, the thing is that it looks like people are upset with the government's response, and they feel like the government is not handling it. That's what I've been reading online. Now, I also know that from people that know other people in mainland China that people are definitely scared. People are scared. They're locked in their homes, like they're locking themselves in their homes. They're scared to go out. And I don't see how there's also a clip that was circulating where the mayor of Wuhan said that he didn't do anything about the virus because he didn't have permission to do anything from the central government. And so it looks to me, just optically, it looks to me like if this virus was a cover for the government to do certain things, the potential damage to the facade of the party looks pretty big. That being said, it could also be done to get rid of people. Maybe they wanted to get rid of the mayor of Wuhan. And so they said, hey, we're going to scapegoat this motherfucker. We're going to, get this whole virus hysteria going. We're going to build our camps. We're going to take out leaders we don't want, and everything will be good. That's possible. They also, of course, are risking some huge economic factors, GDP, things like that, because people are in their homes. And so it's very, very, in my opinion, it's very hard to have an understanding of what's going on here, because one reason I'm getting out of here at the moment is because even though some people are like, look, this isn't that big a deal, I say, look, the Chinese are reportedly quarantining entire cities of tens of millions of people. So, yes, maybe this is all just a conspiracy for them to build camps. That's possible. On the other hand, maybe this is more serious than they're letting on, in which case, if it spreads here, I would rather not be here at the moment. Of course, I've also thought about whether or not it's a good idea to be going through airports. That's a big thing, is I've thought about, well, airports are like the worst place. Like, you don't want to be in an airport and be on a tube plane stuck with people. So there's that. Not a big fan of that per se. But there's a lot of information that we don't know about the situation. And I would like to believe that this is not going to be that big a deal. And I was talking to a friend of mine on Instagram, and he was like, I just thought it was the flu, like just kind of a normal flu thing. And it's like, dude, look, it could be. A friend of mine here in Taipei as well. He's like, look, dude, I don't think this is going to be that big a deal. I think we're going to be okay. I think it's going to be fine. And it's like, yes. I actually think we probably will be. And the other thing is this. Okay, so first off, I do think everything probably will be fine. That being said, just because there's so much unknowns about the situation, I'm going to go ahead and come back. Now, in the future, when I come back here, I've got to think about what would I want to do, right? Because I can't just come back. I can't just, up and go every time something goes wrong. I guess that's possible, right? I guess it just depends. You need to look at every case by case. But I guess what I would say is it would be a good strategy to always have some backup food, some backup instant noodles, backup water, and then be able to shelter in place if necessary, depending on what's going on. So anyway, but I would like to say that this is, this is hopefully just going to be fine. Now, before I go out, I want to touch on the social media censorship again, because in the United States, I think we totally underestimate the potential for social media censorship. This is another reason why I don't know if I believe the theory that this is cover for concentration camps, because when people started spreading a rumor that people were getting sick from a SARS-like illness, the government actually reportedly arrested people for spreading misinformation. And then this got out, and now it's like, okay, so there was a virus. Now, I mean, it's a very elaborate plan to arrest people for misinformation and then go ahead with the information that there's a virus just to get people under control. But there was a Chinese guy who was arrested in China for posting things on Twitter in America. And, the Chinese authorities obviously were monitoring him. And now he is, he's a student at a university in the U.S. And now he's in jail in China because he posted on Twitter in the U.S. something critical, I think, of the Chinese government. And people do not understand how fortunate we are in the U.S. to have some of the freedoms we have. I am fine with critiquing the United States system. I do it all the time. I've said so before. I think we have a tiered system. I don't think justice is as fair as it needs to be in the United States. I don't think it's about racial lines as much as I think it's about people that have enough money and influence get away with things that the rest of us just could never get away with. And so that's where I draw the line. And I know other people have, different opinions. That being said, it is the most free situation that it's one of the most free countries in the world in terms of what you can say online. And I think that's very important. And what we saw in China is that when this virus started to spread, people started to say, hey, there's a virus starting to spread. The government arrested them for misinformation. In the United States on Facebook, we have a situation where people say, oh, you're not allowed to spread fake news, right? Like, oh, you're going to get banned, put off the platform. So the question is, what is the fake news, right? Who guarantees what is fake news? And that is exactly the problem that we see, like with China. China said, hey, look, it's fake news that there's a virus. Well, now they've quarantined 60 million people. So was it fake news all along? I don't think so. Now, here in the U.S., well, we're not in the U.S. now, but in the United States, we have a situation where we say, we have to contain fake news. We need to get rid of people that put fake news. Well, see, this is the model that you're going to. If you want to have the authorities, whether it be the government or you demand that these companies get rid of people that quote unquote spread fake news, then they have to decide what is fake news. And who is to make that decision? Who's going to make that decision? You're telling me that some dude hanging out at Facebook is going to do the proper research to verify and fact check every single claim? No, probably not. Same with Twitter. Okay, and this is one reason why I get so pissed off about the gender stuff. Because, well, it's not reason why, but people get banned on Twitter for saying a man is a woman when the person has a penis and balls, right? And so saying basic biological facts can get you banned off social media sites in the United States. And do we want to live in a world where you can't get out reliable information, true information in times of crisis because it could be offensive to somebody? It could be offensive to an authority. It could be offensive to a minority. We need to be able to say what needs to be said, but we're not going to be able to do that if we want to mimic the Chinese model of censorship. And that is what the social justice warriors in the United States want. They want to mimic the Chinese model of censorship. I personally don't think, I personally believe that many of the social justice warriors, like the pink-haired, blue-haired feminists that don't want women to have children, that want men to identify as women and women to identify as men, I think there are good-natured people in some of these pushes. I myself don't give a fuck what somebody wants to be. You want to identify as a chair, let people sit on your face. I don't care. But that being said, people should be able to say the truth. We should be able to say that, hey, you're actually a man, but you're pretending to be a woman. And I can say that, and it's fine, right? It doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter if it offends that person. That being said, what I wanted to say is that I believe that a lot of the SJW crowd is actually pawns for other people's nefarious purposes. I think it's very possible. I tend to agree with Adam Scrabble on this, that a lot of the, we see that there's an elite in the United States, the elite in the media, the elite in the government, the elite in corporations. I do tend to believe that in order to avoid scrutiny, in order to maintain power and control in the age of super fast information spread and the democratization of information, I do believe that part of the social justice agenda is being fed by people who want a distraction from those who actually have the power in the country or in the world, for a fact. Because if we fight, basically this is causing an internal fight. I've said so before, like civil war type of stuff. We're having an internal fight amongst each other about if somebody born with a penis and balls is a biological man. Like, we've gone down that rabbit hole. I think that there are young people who are legitimately just being brainwashed, and it's not their fault. They don't understand what they're saying, right? They don't understand that they're just being used. I think that's legitimately happening in the United States. Same with the border situation. I've even heard from people in Taipei. Some of them even think that, like, people brought up words like white supremacist. They didn't call anyone that, but they brought it up in terms of what they hear out of the United States, like white supremacists, block refugees, things like that coming from Mexico. I've said in a previous podcast, I was talking to a guy from the States at a hostel. He was 21. And he was talking about, we were talking about Trump for a minute, and the first thing out of his mouth was kids in cages. Kids in cages. And it's like, okay, if you're going to bring up fucking ridiculous points like that, we can't have a conversation. If you're going to say, kids in cages, and that's your what you're going to talk about, then we're done here, right? Because the bottom line is, it's not quote unquote kids in cages. Yes, we are putting people in detention facilities at the border because you can't have an unmitigated flow of people from the entire world come into the country. And however, there is a propaganda effort on in the United States to brainwash people into believing like, oh no, if you believe in any kind of border, if you believe in any kind of border enforcement, then you are a racist, bigot, homophobe. And I have made the claim before that one of the issues with too much immigration at once, even legal immigration, but just too much immigration at once, and illegal immigration, is that you don't get enough assimilation into the society, which could be very dangerous for the core principles of the society. So if your society, like in the United States, like ours is for a republic, we're a federation of states, okay? And beyond that, we have national laws and national protections on certain things like speech, assembly, religion, privacy, things like that. So the issue is that that's not guaranteed unless we guarantee it for ourselves. There's a constant fight in order to maintain some of those principles. A lot of those principles are what have allowed the social progress that we have seen. However, if you want to go ahead and say, well, we don't need freedom of speech anymore because some speech is dangerous, you're not going to see any more progress, right? If you don't want the right to privacy anymore, then we're going to see a lot of negative effects from that. So what does immigration play into this? I'm going to give an example. So in Taipei, in Taiwan, a lot of young people don't want to be a part of mainland China. That's just the bottom line. The older generation has a more nuanced feeling about it. Okay, this is an outsider's perspective, okay? From my understanding, older people have mixed feelings about China because lots of them come from China, lots of them have family in China.